The restaurant glowed in soft golden light, the kind that made everything look warmer and more magical than it really was. A slow jazz melody floated through the air, mixing with the sound of glasses clinking and laughter echoing from tables filled with couples who looked perfectly at ease. But at one small table in the corner near the window sat a young woman who looked like she was holding her breath every few seconds. Her name was Clara. She had spent almost 2 hours getting ready, curling her chestnut hair into soft waves, brushing on a hint of peach lipstick, and choosing the light blue dress that made her feel just a little beautiful. The wheels of her chair gleamed beneath the tablecloth, polished carefully that morning, as though she wanted to hide nothing, yet hoped no one would notice them either. She looked out the window, pretending to admire the city lights while checking her reflection on her phone screen for what felt like the 100th time. The app notification that had brought her here still sat open in her chat. Evan, can't wait to meet you in person. His messages had been funny, thoughtful, and charming, and for the first time in years she had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone could look past the chair. She had told him she was a writer, that she loved Italian food, that she laughed too hard at bad jokes. She hadn't mentioned the accident. She hadn't mentioned that walking was something she only remembered through dreams, not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted him to meet her first, not the chair. The waiter approached, smiling kindly. "Would you like to order while you wait, miss?" Clara smiled back politely. "Not yet, thank you. He should be here any minute." Her voice was calm, but inside her chest her heart was tapping like a drum. She checked the time again. 7:35. 5 minutes late wasn't too bad. Maybe he was parking. Maybe traffic was bad. Maybe he'd walk in any second and their night would start perfectly. She glanced at the entrance every few moments, her fingers twisting the silver bracelet on her wrist, her mother's gift from before the accident. It was her lucky charm. Then finally a tall man in a black coat walked through the door. He scanned the room, looked down at his phone, and then spotted her. Her heart jumped. She straightened her posture and smiled. This was it. This was the start of something new. He walked over with confident steps, his phone still in hand, his eyes glancing from her face to the chair and then back again. Only this time, something in his expression changed. It was quick, but she caught it. Surprise, confusion, then unmistakably disappointment. "Clara?" he asked, though his tone already carried the answer. "Yes, Evan, hi," she said brightly, extending her hand with a small, hopeful smile. He hesitated before shaking it, his palm stiff. He pulled the chair opposite hers slightly too far back, then sat down, looking around awkwardly. For a few seconds, silence sat between them like a wall neither of them knew how to climb. "You look different from your photos," he said finally. Clara blinked, trying to keep her voice light. "Different how?" He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "You didn't mention you were—" He gestured vaguely at her wheelchair, his eyes flicking down as though the word itself were too awkward to say aloud. Clara felt the sting immediately, sharp and familiar. She tried to meet his eyes. "I didn't think it mattered." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You should have said something. I mean, don't you think that's kind of important?" "I mentioned I had a car accident years ago," she said quietly. "I thought you understood." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, but I didn't think you meant this." He waved a dismissive hand at her wheelchair again, this time openly. "You can't just drop that kind of surprise on someone." Clara looked down, her hands tightening around her napkin. "It's not a surprise," she said softly. "It's part of me. The rest of me is still the same person you've been talking to." "Maybe," he muttered, picking up the menu. "But it's not really what I signed up for, is it?" The waiter appeared again, cheerful as before, completely unaware of the tension. "Would you two like to start with something to drink?" Evan waved him off. Give us a minute. Clara forced a polite smile toward the waiter, who nodded and stepped away. When Evan looked up again, his face was colder. Listen, he said, his tone low but not kind. I'm not trying to be rude. You seem nice, but this isn't going to work. I have a certain type, you know. Someone active, adventurous. You can't exactly do that. Clara swallowed hard, her throat burning. You don't even know me yet. He smirked slightly. I know enough. You seem sweet, but I don't do pity dates. That's not me. His words landed like a slap. For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. Around them, the restaurant's soft music went on. Couples laughed, glasses clinked, and no one seemed to notice that the air at their table had gone cold. She blinked fast, not wanting him to see the tears threatening to form. I wasn't asking for pity, she said quietly. I was hoping for decency. Evan chuckled, shrugging as he stood up. Yeah, well, maybe next time be upfront about it. Saves everyone some time. He dropped a few bills on the table, not for the food. There hadn't been any, but as if trying to pay off the awkwardness he'd created. Then he turned and walked toward the door without looking back. Clara sat frozen, staring at the flickering candle between them until it blurred in her vision. What she didn't notice was that at a nearby table, a man had been watching since the moment Evan arrived. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. He hadn't meant to overhear, but the tone of Evan's voice had caught his attention. The kind of tone he despised most in people. He'd seen cruelty before, plenty of it, but there was something about the girl's quiet dignity that made him stop everything else he was doing. As Clara rolled away from the table, her trembling hands gripping the wheels tightly, the man leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. The waiter passed by, offering him another glass of wine, but he barely responded. His eyes followed Clara until she disappeared through the door. Then he set down his glass with deliberate calm and muttered a few quiet words to the man sitting across from him, a man who looked instantly nervous at the tone. Reschedule the meeting, he said simply. The other man hesitated. But sir, the supplier. Now, he interrupted, his gaze fixed on the window where Clara's silhouette faded into the night. Some things, he said quietly, can't be ignored. The waiter, oblivious to who he truly was, smiled politely as he walked by again. Can I get you anything else, sir? The man's lips curved into a small, unreadable smile. No, he replied, his voice deep and calm. But I think I just lost my appetite. The name on the reservation list read Luca Moretti, though few dared to say it out loud. Luca Moretti had learned long ago to keep his emotions buried beneath the surface. In his world, a flicker of feeling could cost a man his life. But as he sat there, his untouched glass of wine reflecting the candlelight, something inside him burned quietly. He had seen cruelty before, on streets and deals gone wrong in the eyes of men who took pleasure in control. Yet the look on that girl's face, the way she had held her dignity when anyone else would have crumbled, unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't pity. Luca didn't pity anyone. It was respect, rare and sharp, the kind that demanded attention. His companion across the table, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, cleared his throat. Boss, should we go over the shipment details? He asked carefully. Luca didn't respond right away. His eyes were still on the empty doorway where the girl had rolled out moments ago. Cancel it, Luca said finally, his voice low. The man blinked in confusion. Cancel the meeting? But the port. I said cancel it, Luca repeated, sharper this time. The other man nodded quickly, fumbling for his phone to relay the message. Luca's attention drifted back to the table where Clara had been sitting, the single napkin she had dropped still on the floor. He gestured for his bodyguard, a tall man named Enzo, who had been standing discreetly near the bar. Enzo leaned down, lowering his voice. Problem? Luca's eyes flicked toward the door. That man. The one who left a few minutes ago. The one with the slick hair and cheap attitude? That's the one. Enzo's lip curled. Want me to handle him? Luca shook his head. Not yet. He stood, adjusting his suit jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. Let's take a walk. Outside, the night was cool, the city alive with the hum of cars and distant laughter. The restaurant's front lights cast a soft glow across the pavement, where Clara had been waiting for her taxi not long ago. Luca's gaze moved over the scene, sharp and calculating. He could almost see her there still, quiet, trying to hold herself together as the world treated her like she was less. He'd grown up seeing his own mother treated the same way after his father's death. He had promised himself that day he'd never let anyone be looked down upon again while he stood by. A gust of wind passed through, carrying the faint sound of heels clicking against concrete. Luca turned his head and saw Evan, the smug face, the careless stride, the kind of man who thought cruelty was confidence. He was laughing on his phone, oblivious to the shadow that was watching him from a few steps away. Yeah, man. She was in a wheelchair. Evan said loudly, as though the words were funny. Total waste of my time. I almost walked out the second I saw her. He laughed again, too loud, too arrogant. Enzo took a step forward, but Luca raised a hand to stop him. His jaw tightened. Pathetic, Luca murmured under his breath. The sound of the word made Evan glance up, confused. But Luca was already turning away, his coat swaying lightly behind him. Back inside the restaurant, the waiter approached hesitantly. Sir, will you still be dining with us tonight? Later, Luca replied. Send my compliments to the chef, and tell the manager to waive the young woman's bill from earlier. Yes, sir, the waiter said quickly, sensing something in Luca's tone that told him not to ask questions. Luca walked out again, lighting a cigarette as the door closed behind him. The smoke curled upward into the night as his thoughts wandered. He didn't even know the girl's name, yet she lingered in his mind like a faint melody he couldn't shake. He didn't like that. He was a man who preferred control over everything, his business, his reputation, even his emotions. But this was different. He had seen hundreds of people beg, fight, or lie in front of him, but her silence had been stronger than any of that. She hadn't pleaded or shouted or tried to prove herself. She had simply held her head high, even when someone had tried to break her spirit. As he walked to his car, his driver opened the door. Where to, sir? Luca exhaled, tossing the cigarette aside. Follow that man, he said, nodding toward Evan, who was now swaggering down the street, still talking on his phone. The driver gave a small nod, and within moments, the sleek black car rolled silently down the road behind him. Evan, unaware, kept walking until he reached a parking lot. He climbed into his car, still laughing into the phone. No, I didn't even sit through dinner, man. She started talking about her job or something, but I couldn't focus. All I could think was, what kind of life is that? Always being pushed around. He laughed again. Not my problem. The laughter was cut off when a shadow fell across his windshield. He looked up to see a tall man standing in front of the car, the same one from the restaurant. His heart skipped. He hadn't even noticed the car following him. He rolled down the window halfway. Can I help you? Luca's expression didn't change. You can apologize, Evan frowned. Excuse me? Luca leaned closer, resting one hand casually on the roof of the car. You humiliated a woman tonight. You're going to fix that. Evan scoffed, trying to sound braver than he felt. Look, man, I don't know who you think you are, but it's none of your business. People go on bad dates all the time. Luca's voice stayed calm. No, bad dates happen when two people don't get along. What you did was different. You made her feel small, and that, unfortunately for you, is my business. Something in his tone made the air heavy. Evan swallowed, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. You're crazy, he muttered. Get away from my car. Enzo appeared beside Luca, his size blocking the view of the streetlights. He leaned slightly toward Evan's window. "You should listen to him," Enzo said quietly. For the first time, Evan noticed the faint glint of something metallic inside Luca's jacket. Not a weapon in sight, but the reputation spoke louder than anything. Realization spread across his face. "Wait, I've heard that name before. You're—" Luca cut him off with a slight shake of his head. "Names don't matter. Actions do. Next time you open your mouth to insult someone who's done nothing wrong, remember this moment." Evan stuttered, trying to find words. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean anything by it. It was a misunderstanding." Luca stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said softly. "Then you understand perfectly." He turned and walked away, Enzo following. Evan sat frozen, staring after them until the taillights of Luca's car disappeared. His hand shook slightly on the steering wheel. He didn't know who that man was exactly, but he knew enough now to wish he had never opened his mouth that night. Back in the car, Enzo glanced at his boss. "You really let him off easy," he said. Luca looked out the window, the faintest ghost of a smile on his lips. "He'll remember. Fear lasts longer than pain." Enzo nodded, then hesitated. "So what now?" Luca's gaze drifted toward the reflection of the city lights. "Now," he said quietly, "I find out who she is." The city was quieter now, the night growing heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Clara sat outside the restaurant, her hands resting on her lap, her heart still caught somewhere between humiliation and numbness. The taxi she'd called was taking forever, and every passing minute felt like another reminder that maybe she didn't belong in places like this. Not in the world of polished marble floors and laughing couples who never seemed to stumble. She looked down at her reflection in a puddle by the curb. The girl who looked back at her had the same tired eyes, the same soft hair, the same brave little smile she'd practiced too many times. But something inside her felt smaller now, quieter. She had told herself that tonight would be a new beginning. Instead, it had felt like the world reminding her again that people didn't always see the soul first. They saw the chair. A car door closed nearby, soft but deliberate. She didn't turn right away, assuming it was someone leaving the restaurant. But then a voice, deep and controlled, spoke behind her. "You handled that better than most." Clara turned, slightly startled. The man standing a few steps away wasn't the kind of person one could ignore easily. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that caught the light like water, his expression calm but unreadable. His eyes, dark and sharp, studied her not with pity, but with something closer to respect. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said quietly. "You didn't," she replied, though her voice trembled a little. "I just didn't expect anyone to talk to me tonight." He stepped closer, stopping just enough distance away not to make her feel cornered. "I saw what happened inside," he said. "You didn't deserve that," she gave a small, tired laugh. "It's not the first time," she admitted. "And probably not the last." His brow furrowed slightly. "You shouldn't be used to it." "Life doesn't give much of a choice," she said softly, turning her gaze back to the street. "People see what they want to see. I can't change that." He studied her for a long moment, the way a man might study something fragile but unbreakable at its core. "You're wrong," he said finally. "You already changed something. You didn't let him win." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening in the glow of the streetlight. "That's kind of you to say, but it didn't feel like winning." The man's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Winning doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it just looks like walking, or in your case, rolling, away without losing yourself." That made her laugh quietly, a small, genuine sound that softened the tension between them. "You're surprisingly poetic for someone who looks like he just walked out of a boardroom," she said. He chuckled, the sound deep and low. I've been called many things. Poetic was never one of them. Before she could reply, the restaurant doors swung open behind them and Evan's voice cut through the quiet night. "Oh, look who's here, the knight in shining suit," he said mockingly, stumbling slightly as he stepped onto the sidewalk. He must have had another drink after she left. His smirk widened when he saw Clara. "Still here? Guess the pity party's not over yet." Clara flinched slightly, but the man beside her didn't move at first. His calm presence felt like a wall between her and the storm she'd already endured. When he finally spoke, his tone was soft, but it carried a weight that made the air shift. "You should leave." Evan blinked, confused, then scoffed. "Excuse me?" "I said leave," the man repeated, his gaze cold enough to slice through marble. Evan snorted. "Who do you think you are, her bodyguard?" He looked him up and down, still smirking. "This doesn't concern you, pal." "It does now," the man said quietly. "You made it my concern when you humiliated her." Before Evan could respond, another man appeared from the shadows. Tall, broad, wearing a dark coat that did little to hide the hard lines of muscle underneath. He stopped beside the suited man, his face expressionless. Evan's smirk faltered slightly. "What, you brought backup?" he said, his tone uncertain now. The taller man spoke for the first time. "You should apologize." Evan laughed nervously. "Apologize for what? Having standards?" The suited man stepped forward and the streetlight caught his eyes. Evan froze. There was something about him, not the expensive suit, not the way he carried himself, but the authority that seemed to radiate from him. It wasn't anger. It was power, quiet and unshakable. "Apologize," the man repeated. Evan opened his mouth, then hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain, even afraid. I didn't mean anything by it," he stammered. "That's not an apology," the man said softly. Evan swallowed hard, glancing between the two men. His bravado crumbled. "I'm sorry," he muttered, finally looking at Clara. "Okay? I'm sorry." Clara's eyes widened slightly, not because she wanted his apology, but because she hadn't expected to hear it. The man beside her nodded once, as if satisfied. "Now go," he said. Evan didn't need to be told twice. He turned and hurried away, his footsteps uneven on the pavement. For a long moment after he disappeared, silence hung between them. Clara looked up at the man, confusion and curiosity mixing in her gaze. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He shrugged. "Yes, I did," she smiled faintly. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," he said. "But I know people like him. They think they're strong because they can make others feel small. They mistake cruelty for confidence. I have no patience for that." She tilted her head. "Who are you exactly?" He paused, then smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Someone who doesn't like seeing good people hurt." Her taxi finally arrived, pulling up beside them. The driver leaned out the window. "Miss Clara?" She blinked. "How do you—" The man gestured toward the driver. "I asked him to wait for you." She looked at him, surprised again. "You really didn't have to go through the trouble." "It wasn't trouble," he said simply. "It's respect." As she reached for the door, he handed her a small cream-colored card. Embossed on it was a name, Luca Moretti. Her brow furrowed slightly. "You're—" He nodded once. "If anyone ever treats you like that again, call me." She gave a half smile. "And what exactly do you do, Mr. Moretti?" His eyes softened. "I fix problems." Her laugh was soft but real, the kind that carried warmth even through the cold night air. "I think you already did." He inclined his head slightly, watching as the taxi pulled away, his reflection flickering in the glass as she disappeared down the street. For a long moment he stood there, hands in his pockets, the sound of rain finally beginning to fall around him. Enzo stepped closer. "She seems strong," he said quietly. Luca's eyes followed the taxi's taillights until they vanished into the city. Stronger than most, he murmured. Then, almost to himself, he added, but no one should have to fight alone. The rain began to fall harder, soaking into the street. But Luca didn't move. He just stood there, staring into the distance, knowing deep down that the girl he'd just met wasn't leaving his thoughts anytime soon. The rain had stopped by the time the morning light crept into the city, washing the streets in pale gold. Clara sat by her window, a cup of coffee cooling beside her untouched. Her mind replayed the night before over and over again. Evan's cruel words, the sting of humiliation, and then the strange, fierce calm of the man who had stepped between her and the cruelty like it was instinct. Luca Moretti. The name still echoed in her thoughts. She'd looked him up later out of curiosity, expecting to find nothing. But what she found instead had made her freeze. The internet was careful with his name. Rumors, whispers, stories without proof. Some said he was a businessman. Others said he was something much darker. She didn't know what to believe, only that when he had spoken to her, she hadn't felt fear. She'd felt seen. Days passed, but her mind refused to let go of that night. The card he had given her sat on her desk, simple and elegant. No phone number, just his name embossed in silver. She didn't plan to call, of course. She had no reason to. He had stepped in, said what needed to be said, and vanished. People like him didn't stay in the lives of people like her. Still, every now and then, she found herself tracing the edges of that card with her fingers, wondering why a stranger's kindness felt heavier than all the pity she'd known before. A week later, on a Friday evening, she returned to the same restaurant. It was unplanned. She had been writing all day and decided she deserved a small treat. Maybe a glass of wine. Maybe just to prove to herself that the place didn't own her fear. The waiter recognized her instantly, his face lighting up with surprise and something like guilt. "Miss Clara," he said, his tone soft. "Welcome back," she smiled politely. "Just a table for one." He hesitated, glancing toward the corner of the room. "Actually," he said carefully, "there's a reservation tonight under your name. Sort of." Clara frowned. "What do you mean, sort of?" He gestured toward the corner table, the very one where she had sat that painful night. Only now the table had been reset beautifully. A single white rose in a vase, 2 crystal glasses, candles flickering softly. Seated there, waiting with the quiet composure of someone completely in control of his world, was Luca Moretti. For a moment she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. But when he looked up and met her eyes, that same calm, unreadable expression returned, softened by a small, genuine smile. The waiter leaned closer. "He's been waiting for you," he whispered before walking away. Clara hesitated, her heart pounding hard enough that she could hear it. Slowly she wheeled her way over, feeling every gaze in the room shift toward her. Luca stood as she approached, something few people ever did for her. He held out his hand and said simply, "I told you I wouldn't be watching from across the room this time." She couldn't help but laugh softly, shaking her head. "You're full of surprises." He gestured to the seat opposite her. "You're full of strength. I thought I'd see it again." As she settled in, the air between them felt charged but not uncomfortable. He didn't look at her chair, didn't flinch or offer unnecessary help. He simply saw her, as though the chair was as unimportant as the color of her dress. The waiter brought wine, and for a few moments they sat in quiet, the music from the piano drifting softly around them. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally. "You didn't have to do this." "I didn't have to," he agreed, his voice low and certain. "But I wanted to," she smiled faintly. "Why? You don't even know me." He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "Maybe I don't, but sometimes you don't need to know someone to recognize what they deserve." She looked down, touched but uncertain. "You shouldn't waste your time on someone like me." That made his jaw tighten just a little. Someone like you? You know what I mean, she said quietly. You live in a world I could never fit into. I can't run, can't travel easily, can't— Stop, he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. Don't ever measure your worth by what you can't do. People like Evan do that. Don't become like them. She blinked, caught off guard by the intensity in his tone. You sound like someone who's seen too much of that kind of world. I have, he said simply. And I've done things I'm not proud of. But that doesn't mean I can't recognize grace when I see it. She met his eyes then, and for the first time, she noticed something behind his calm, a loneliness that matched her own. Dinner passed in a blur of conversation that felt too easy for two strangers. He asked her about her writing, listened when she spoke about her dreams, and even made her laugh when he told her about his terrible cooking skills. It was strange how natural it felt, how unforced. When the check came, she reached for her wallet, but he shook his head. You can get the next one, he said with a smile. The next one? She asked. I don't plan for this to be the last, he replied. Outside, the city lights shimmered across wet pavement as he walked beside her, his pace slow and unhurried to match hers. She noticed how people stepped out of his way without even realizing why. There was something about him that made the air feel heavier, but she wasn't afraid. When they reached her car, he paused. Do you ever wonder why some people cross your path when they do? She smiled softly. All the time, he nodded. Maybe it's because the world knows when you need someone to stand beside you, even for a moment. She looked at him, her chest tightening in a way that wasn't painful, but deeply human. You think that's what this is? A moment. His eyes softened. That depends on whether you show up for dinner again next week. She laughed quietly. You don't give up easily, do you? Never have, he said. And there was something in his tone that told her he meant it. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. For you, he said. A reminder that dignity is stronger than cruelty. She took it carefully, her fingers brushing against his for a second longer than necessary. You don't even know what to say to that, she admitted. Then just say you'll call, he said softly. She looked at the locket, then at him, and smiled. I'll call. As she drove away, she glanced once in the mirror. Luca was still standing there under the streetlight, watching until her car disappeared around the corner. He slipped his hands into his pockets and looked up at the sky, the faintest smile playing on his lips. For a man who had built a life surrounded by power, danger, and secrets, he hadn't expected to find light in something as simple as a girl's courage. But that night, as he walked back toward his car, he realized something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. And somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of one that neither of them had seen coming.